Asato ma sadagamaya tamaso homaham jyotir gamaya mrityormam amritam gamaya avir ahavir maidhi Rudra yate dakshinam mukham te namaham pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is the practice of contentment. And we can begin with the fundamental teaching of the Vedanta philosophy, which is that you are a divine immortal soul. You are not the physical flesh and blood body that is born, grows old, and dies. You are not the immaterial mind, which is like a lake, the waves of thought and feeling. And you are not the role that you play on the stage in the melodrama of life. And you are not the person that you think yourself to be. And that your persona is just a megaphonic mask that you wear to relate to the world. And the teaching is that you're not the body or the mind, but that you are the spirit. The spirit is by nature not physical. It's metaphysical. It's not psychological. It's parapsychological. It is not personal. It's transpersonal. Not mortal, but immortal. This is the spirit. That is, we have a body, we have a mind, we have a soul, and we have a spirit. And the spirit is, in Sanskrit, is called the Atman. That is, in Sanskrit, that's the self with a capital S. And sometimes we make a distinction between self with a small s, capital S. Really, there's only one self. And that is yourself, the Atman. The Atman is by nature, because the Atman is the spirit. It is by definition unlimited. Spirit is by its very nature unlimited, unbounded, and infinite. And as the spirit, you are unbounded, and you are unlimited, and you are infinite. And because there can't be two infinite beings, there's really only one only without a second. And thou art that. That's the teaching of the Vedanta philosophy, that you are that one only without. There are not two. There are not many. There is only one. And because there is only one being, that is your true self, it is all encompassing. Yourself, the infinite being, contains within itself, everything is contained within the self. That is, all knowledge is within you. You are omniscient. All time, space is within you. You are omnipresent. All time is within you. You're immortal and eternal. And all power is within you. You are omnipotent. These are the descriptions of the self, the Atman, the soul. You contain everything within yourself. Nothing is left out. Nothing is missing. Nothing is lacking. You don't want for anything. You're already perfect. And, well, you may say, well, that sounds good, but I really don't feel that way. I really don't feel as if I am infinite and omniscient and omnipotent. In fact, I feel often very small and vulnerable, and the scriptures may say that I am an infinite, divine, immortal soul, that I am the Atman, and I'm already perfect, but the fact is that I really feel like a poor, helpless, lost, miserable sinner. I mean, you may say that. So that's the tragedy. It's true. That's kind of the tragedy of human life. And it's, according to the Vedanta philosophy, it's perfectly natural. It's perfectly normal that we feel that way. Why? Because we are alienated from ourselves. We are strangers to ourselves. We're lost to ourselves. We've forgotten our true nature. We've projected a whole world which is apart from ourselves. That is the world of the non-self. We superimpose that world upon ourselves. We superimpose our true self and the nature on that world. That's called adhyasa. And that's the tragedy of human life. The nobility, however, there is a nobility of human life. There is a positive, optimistic truth. And that is that each one of us is consciously or unconsciously struggling every moment of every day to become who we really are, to regain our true self, to recall our true nature. Our whole life is kind of an ongoing identity crisis, struggling to realize who we really are, and not only in this life, but in life after life. And we begin by seeking for that which is lost outside of ourselves, in the world of the senses, in the external world. And there we seek for what we hope to find in the world today, tomorrow, or sometime in the future. In the course of time, there will be an awakening of spiritual consciousness. We begin to realize that that which we seek is not outside of ourselves. It's not somewhere in the distant future, but that it is within us, and that it is here and now, and that we are that which we seek. And once upon a time, there was in ancient Japan a man who, with the tools of his trade, the hammer, the chisel, and the axe, he hewed stones from rock. And he was a stone cutter. And he worked all day in the hot sun, cutting those stones hour after hour. He was tired and he was weary, and he was not content. And one day He sat down on one of those great stones, and he thought to himself, I wish that I was a rich man, sitting on a soft cushion, a nice, tall, cool glass of water to drink. And lo and behold, an angel descended from heaven, appeared before him and said, you are what you thought. And he looked down, and there he was. He was sitting on a soft cushion. In his hand, he is holding a glass of cool water, and he was a rich man. And there he sat. He was very happy. And time passed. Later that day, there came along the road a procession of the Maharaja and the king of the traveling down that road with the 20 golden chariot, a gold and silver parasol, 20 horses in front, 20 behind. And as those horses and that chariot passed by the stonecutter, that is now a rich man, he sat there and he looked at, marveled at that procession. He said, wow, yeah. You know, I wish that I was a king. And traveling like that in a chariot. And lo and behold, an angel descended from on heaven, appeared before him and said, you are what you thought. He looked at, there he was. He found himself in a chariot. Gold and silver parasol overhead, 20 horses in front, 20 behind, and he rode along. But yes, he's very happy. And but as he rode along, the sun was shining very brightly. And he was feeling hotter and hotter, and even that gold and silver parasol wasn't enough to look up. That blinding sun up in the sky, and he thought, how powerful is that sun? Infinitely more powerful than me, a mere king on the earth. He said, I wish that I was the sun. And an angel descended from on heaven, appeared before him, and said, you are what you thought. And he looked down there, he saw he had become the sun, shining in the sky. And there he was, radiant, brilliant everywhere, illumined by the sun of the air and the inner spaces and all of the earth below. And there he shone in all his glory. What could be greater than the sun? Till one day, a cloud came rolling by there. A cloud rolling by, and a cloud completely blocked out the light of the sun. And the sun shone and shone, nothing couldn't penetrate. He said, wow, look, that cloud is more powerful than myself. And he began to think, I can't, that I wish that I was a cloud. An angel descended from on heaven, appeared before him, and said, you are what you thought. And there he became a cloud. And there he was in the sky, a great rain cloud. And it was dark and darker and darker and darker. That cloud became filled with rain, and the thunder began to roll, and the lightning to flash, and the rain fell on the earth. And it rained, and the water just began to flood the streets, and washing everything away before the mighty flood from that great rain cloud. The cloud looked down, yes, very good. And that water just swept everything away in its path, except for one thing. And that was a great, mighty rock. Rock just stood there, immovable. Water flowed around it, couldn't move it. Cloud looked down and thought, yeah, that rock, one thing, is more powerful than myself. And he began to thought to himself, yes, I wish I was a rock. An angel descended from on heaven, appeared before him, and said, you are what you thought. And there he was, a giant rock, rooted, immovable, in the ground. There he stood. And the sun shone, nothing could have. The rains fell, water swept around him, nothing could move that mighty rock. Until one day, a man came by that way. And he was a stone cutter. And with the tools of his trade, the hammer, the chisel, and the axe, he hewed stones from rock. And he began to hammer, and he began to chisel, and the rock felt himself completely starting to disintegrate. He realized he was completely helpless before the power of this man. And he wished to himself, I wish that I was a stone cutter. And the angel descended from heaven, appeared before him, and said, "You are what you thought." And so he became a stone cutter. And worked from dawn till dusk, sun shining in the sky overhead, but he was happy. And he was content. And even though the hot sun shone during the day, and the wind blew, and the rain fell, he was content. And even though the rich men and the kings passed by that way, he sat there and he remained happy and content within himself. So that's the story about the stone cutter. Well, he returned to his true nature. It took him a while. In the course of life after life, he learned lessons. But then again, he reached the goal, with that which is the goal and purpose of each of every human person struggling, consciously or unconsciously, to regain our true self, and there to find perfect contentment. I'll tell you another story about contentment. Long ago, in the days of sailing ships, it was growing late one day, and a bird, she'd flown around all during the day, getting very late. So she flew over through into the harbor, perched on the main mast of a ship, there to rest. And as she rested, she closed her eyes, and pretty soon time passed, night fell. The rocking of the boat put her to sleep. And while she slept, that great sailing ship weighed anchor, middle of the night, and sailed onto the high seas. And when that little bird awoke in the morning, opened her eyes, she looked all around and was appalled. Where's my trees? Where's my nest? Where are all my bird friends? Couldn't see anything. No trees, no houses, no land anywhere, water everywhere. And she became very anxious and became very worried, and thought to herself, I have to find land. And so she flew to the west. And she began to fly towards the west. And she looked around, didn't see water everywhere, not a drop to drink, there's nothing there. And she, finally getting more and more tired, thought, I better return to the ship, which she did, came back to the ship's mast, barely in time, catch her breath, and there to rest on the main mast. Well, she rested for a little while in the afternoon, decided to try again. So she set up flying for the north. She flew and flew. The time passed, getting colder and colder, getting further north. Colder winds were starting to blow. Looked everywhere. There's no land in this direction either. She realized that she better turn back, return to the ship's mast. So she came back, perched on that mast, tired, exhausted, slept the night. Next morning she woke to try again. And the sun was it was before dawn. She set off flying to the east, flew and flew. The sun rose slowly, became hotter and hotter. Flying, looked everywhere, no land in this direction either. Finally realized that I'd better turn around, go back to the ship's mast. There she rested. In the afternoon, decided to try again. She flew to the south. She flew and flew, water everywhere, looked down, saw those great whirlpool, sharks swimming around. There's no land in this direction either. So she returned to the ship's mast, perched there on the mast late at night, rested there, and slept the night. And the next morning when she awoke, she looked and saw the sun was shining overhead, blue sky everywhere. This morning she had no plans, nowhere to go. Remained sitting there comfortably on that main mast, warm sun overhead, looked down, saw that mighty ship below her, and looked forward to the great journey which lay ahead. So that's the story about the bird on the ship's mast. Our subject this morning is the practice of contentment. And I'm not going to give you any step-by-step instructions as to how to practice contentment. But the general principle here is stated in an old Sanskrit verse, which says that the realization of the siddhas is the practice of the sadhaka. That's the principle here. We need only contemplate the realization of the siddhas to understand what should be the practice of ourselves, the sadhakas. And if we look, for example, at the bird on the ship's mast, immediately we can understand, immediately we can get some hint as to what can we do, how could we practice contentment. Well, for one thing, we can return to the ship's mast, and we can sit down quietly and relax and be here now and remind ourselves, if we get so real restless, we can remind ourselves that there is no land in that direction either. And so we might as well sit quietly and be happy and be content and be here now and abide in the self and affirm the truth about ourself that as students of Vedanta, we have arrived at that truth. That is the purpose of our spiritual practice, is to arrive at that conviction that what we said here in the beginning, that you are a divine immortal soul, we have to arrive at that conviction in our mind and heart. Conviction means it's not just in our mind, it's in our heart, that we believe that that's true. And then we have to be convinced in it. We have to hear about it, think about it, and contemplate it. And then we have to affirm it and behave and act as if it was so. And so we can see that this is the practice, how the word there is the kind of the practice of perfect contentment. The question arises in our mind, what does it, once we attain self-knowledge, once we attain complete self-realization, once we discover everything within ourselves, once we realize that we're infinite, the divine immortal souls, and that we're already perfect, then the question may arise, well, then what? Then what do we do? I mean, how do we act? What do we do on that occasion? And in fact, this was the very question that was asked by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita in the 2nd chapter. We read in the 2nd chapter, the highest flight of the teaching of the Vedanta philosophy. Sri Krishna was teaching his disciple Arjuna all about the soul, about the self, about the nature of your true self. And in verse after verse, he describes the nature of the soul. And it's a very high-minded, uplifting, metaphysical discourse. And at the end of the chapter 2, Sri Arjuna, having heard all these inspiring words, he addresses Arjuna with his verse, Stita pragyasya kabasha samadhistasya keshava stita hi kim prabhasheta kim masita vrajeta kim. He asked him the question. After having heard, yes, all you've said is all this inspiring talk about the divine immortal soul, the divine self, and about the description of the nature of the self realized by the man of steady wisdom. This is the last part of the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Description of the man of steady wisdom. That is the person who has realized the self. And Arjuna is asking him, what you've said is all this high metaphysical teaching is all very good. But my question is, how does he sit? How does he walk? How does he behave? What does he say? That is, he wanted some kind of more concrete graphic imagery in order to inspire him as to what is his ideal. And so, similarly, it is with us. We can, our ideal in this lineage is the harmony of all the 4 different yogas. And if we think in our mind, we can visualize a devotee or a bhakta on the path of devotion, maybe who's achieved the highest levels, who's become a great saint. We can picture a great saint singing and dancing in the name and the glories of God, singing the name and glories of God. And we can, in our mind's eye, we can picture a great karma yogi also, a heroic worker, a hero of selfless service, working selflessly to make for the welfare of others, moved by compassion to make the world a better place. And we can visualize also a Raja Yogi, that is a great mystic, maybe high up in a cave in the Himalayas, sitting there immersed, absorbed in samadhi and meditation. But when it comes to visualizing a jnani, that is a man of steady wisdom, maybe that's a little more difficult for us to do that. And if we read through the lives of the saints, fundamental spiritual practice, of course, recommended in all the different kinds of yoga, that is to study the lives of the saints. If we read in the lives of the saints, we can find that we do have a very good example of self-contentment in the life of a great sage. His name was Ramana Maharshi. That is, he lived in South India. Contemporary sage. Passed away in 1950. Lived in a small, what was then a village in Tiruvannamalai. And he realized the Atman. He realized the true self at a very early age. And he lived the rest of his life abiding in the self. And so when we ask ourselves, like Arjuna, what is it like to realize your true nature? What does a jnani, that is a person who has attained self-knowledge, that is, who has attained jnana, what in Greek they used to call gnosis, same Sanskrit root, divine knowledge, self-knowledge. What does he do? And so we have a very good example here. We can ask ourselves, what did Ramana Maharshi do? What did he do? Well, we can see very clearly what he didn't do. We can see very clearly that he did not write a book. He did not give lectures. Didn't give classes. He did not set about working for the welfare of the world. He did not, in fact, he didn't do anything. He just sat there calmly in a state of perfect serenity, his mind like a calm and placid lake. And he didn't retire to the Himalayas and live the rest of his life in a cave. And he didn't go around working to build churches, build up some social service organization. And he just sat there and calm serenity. That is, once you have realized the self, you don't have to do anything. There's an end of becoming. And it's all about self-realization. It's not about becoming. It's all about being. Being, consciousness, and bliss. And that's the visualization. And so different saints, different sages, different incarnations, they all kind of represent and embody different ideals. And in their lives kind of represent good examples of different kinds of spiritual practice. And it seems that in the life of Ramana Maharshi, for example, his ideal or his kind of mission, or his kind of destiny, part of the divine plan was for him to embody this ideal of perfect contentment. And so that's our contemplation this morning. Here's the contentment. Atmanam ched vijaniyat ayam asmiti purushaha kim michan kasya kamaya shariram anusangaret. See the verses there? And I'm going to quote you a couple of verses here from the Ashtavakra Samhita. And there it says, if a man were to realize his true nature, and if he was to realize his true self, then for what reason would he ever trouble himself to do anything? Why would he even bother to do anything? Well, now Ramana Maharshi did do things, but moved by his students of the law of karma, you know about prarabdha karma, that is, there is momentum from previous actions, which kind of, as a result, we still follow the same routine. That is, at lunchtime, and the bell rings, we go to the lunchroom, we come back. And so the same routine is followed during the day. But other than that, for what reason would such a person allow himself to be troubled? There it says in the verse, what reason would he allow his mind to be troubled by doing anything? And in another verse it gives an example of gives us a picture of what the scriptures call, they call him the master idler. The master idler. He said, once one has realized the self and become a master idler, then for what and for whom would he ever trouble himself? In fact, even kind of the opening and closing of the eyelids becomes an affliction. It's true. It takes effort to breathe. We think, okay, well, it's unconscious, you can say, yeah. But if you had really realized this truth deeper and deeper, then it begins to penetrate into the limbic system and penetrate down into the brainstem and things. The cerebellum starts to slow down. That's why Sri Ramakrishna sometimes he'd tell us confide to society, if I'm sitting here one day, you're here, and if you see that I've stopped breathing, you have to give me a little push, remind me to breathe. Because he was kind of living, you see, on that in Sri Ramakrishna, the incarnation. We've discussed this on other occasions, how he lived in bhavamukha, that is on the borderland between the absolute and the relative. And although, yes, he kind of struggled to retain consciousness, the waking state, sometimes he would become absorbed and distracted. And he would identify fully with his true self, and as a result of which the breathing would slow. And so that's the nature of the self-knowledge. Well, kind of hard for us, a little difficult maybe, for us to get it. A little difficult for us to understand it or to sympathize with it. Maybe in fact it kind of rubs you the wrong way. Maybe it kind of raises questions in your mind as to what is going on. I mean, are you kidding? Is this the real goal and purpose of our life? Just to remain abiding in the self. Well, you remember how there's an old anecdote from the Zen Buddhist tradition. Some villagers were working in the hills, cutting the leaves there, the tea plants in the hills. And as they worked hard, the whole village was there. They were all working together. Everyone was working. Someone noticed that there's a hill nearby. Way up on that hill, they noticed there was a man up there. He was looking up there. They continued working, look up, and another person looked, he's still there. Time passed, they looked up again. The man was still there, he's just standing there. So like this, everybody, who is that? What's he doing? They became very curious. Everyone in the village is working. There he's doing nothing. Who is he? So finally, the curiosity, they left a couple of villagers, they just left, they left there. The tea plants went up, wended their way over hill and dale, and they went up, climbed up that hill. There they got up the hill. There they come along, they see there's that man. Hello, sir. What are you doing up here? He said, are you enjoying the view here? The man looked at it. No. He said, well, are you looking for somebody? He said, no. He said, well, are you lost? He said, no. I said, well, what are you doing here? And he said, I'm just standing. That's the story. That's a typical Zen Buddhist story. But it kind of illustrates our teaching here this morning. Of course, our natural response at that point, our natural response would be, that is, I say our, I mean those of us raised maybe in a Judeo-Christian tradition, our natural response would be that don't just stand there, do something. I mean, just to spend time standing there is not achieving anything. It's not accomplishing anything. After all, in America, this is a land of action. We're used to taking charge of our lives. We're used to being active, achieving goals, moving onward and upward, progressing, constantly becoming something better, better and better. And that's why this teaching here of the wisdom of the East, they say, don't just do something, stand there. Now that's a kind of a completely different, maybe it's a message. Maybe it's a message and a teaching that we can learn from the wisdom of the East. And this is America, the land of action. Maybe we could say that the East, stereotypically anyhow, is the land of contemplation. And we believe that we are to be active, that we are to move onward and upward, and to always be moving forward and achieving something. But there's also something we may learn of the lesson, that maybe there's something to be said for pure quietism and contemplation. And there's an old Zen Haiku Poem that kind of expresses our ideal. Here's the poem. You know these haiku, but they're only 3 lines. They're short and sweet. Here's the poem. Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself. So that's the poem. And the kind of the idea is that is a sage who's seated there quietly, doing nothing. Everything happens. The gunas of Prakriti play with the gunas of Prakriti. He remains as the witness, the calm, detached, witness of everything. And thus he abides in the self. I remember that there was this was long ago now, there was a television special on the public television. It was entitled The Long Search. And it was a series of episodes about visiting different religious traditions, and the different saints and holy men and teachers of those religions were interviewed in each episode of the series. And in one of those, the television crew went to Japan, and they visited a Japanese Zen monastery. And we could see as we go into the monastery, the camera's there, they walk inside the temple. Immediately we're struck with the fact that this is typical Japanese decor. That is, there is nothing in there. It's minimalism. There's no furniture. A few maybe tatami mats on the floor. Maybe there's a calligraphy scroll hanging on the wall. Otherwise nothing. No furniture, no chairs. No big lecture podium, shrine, nothing. But down at the far end, they walk along through this empty hall there at the far end, there's the Zen master. And he's seated on a cushion. And they go up and they begin to speak with the Zen master. What is the secret of your religion? What is the teaching of the Zen Buddhists? And I still remember in the course of his reply, he spoke with them for some time, but in the course of his answer, he quoted the French philosopher Pascal. And Pascal once said, the sole cause of all human misery, the sole cause of all human misery is the inability of people to remain seated quietly in their own rooms. So that kind of summarizes our teaching this morning. And our conclusion, well, we didn't give any detailed steps here as to how go about practicing abiding in the self. And it's all about simply being who you really are. That is, understanding what is the teaching and the logical entailment of the teaching, and the behavior that corresponds with the truth, and about practicing what you preach, and about your behavior being authentic, and about your behavior reflecting who you really are and what you really believe. If you really believe that you're the Atman, then this is the picture. If you don't really believe it, then we have to do more sadhana. That is, or shravana madana dididhasana. That is, the ideal is that we have to come to the conviction of the truth. And so even though we didn't give a step-by-step instructions, we gave some indication here of some imagery. It's very helpful for us to get clear in our minds some of the imagery that represents our highest ideal. And contemplating this ideal of self-realization. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prithivi Shantihi Apa Shantihi, O Shadaya Shantihi, Vanaspataya Shantihi, Vishwe Deva Shantihi, Brahma Shantihi, Saravam Shantihi, Shantireva Shantihi, Same Shantiredhi, Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal, universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.